Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, hosted by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Ethan Orfe, and I hope everyone had a wonderful Christmas. My Christmas was pretty good. Spent it watching with the family, hanging out with them, watching some NBA, watching my Pelicans get the W against a really, really good Nuggets team. So that was a nice Christmas present for all the Pelicans fans out there, as we didn't get to go watch Zion again. You know, we're waiting on that one. But Christmas was good. Good food. I'm part Jamaican, so we had the oxtail, the rice and peas, and all of that. So it was a lot of good food, good people. But there was no NFL because it was Christmas on a Wednesday. But there's a lot of things to review about fantasy football, as most people's leagues are done. They're over. But daily fantasy still continues. Some people are running a weird system where they end at week 17. I wouldn't want to be a part of a league like that, because week 17 is notorious for being a weird one, and it's always a bit of a toss-up. So you never really know what you're going to get into during week 17, but don't worry. Us here at the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast are here to help you figure that right out. But we're going to go ahead and get into our first big topic of the day, which is the biggest fantasy performances from week 16 / the most disappointing ones. And I'm going to go ahead and get into be a little bit more positive before we get into a little bit of the negative stuff. So let's talk about Saquon Barkley rising from the ashes for everybody's championship games. Now, if you've been riding with Saquon all year, you know he has been up and down, and it was on a downslope for a little bit until about 2 weeks ago, where he looked like he came back to life. And last week, if you started him because you felt like this was the week to do so, right? If you started him that week in a barn burner of a game against the Redskins, which is just hilarious for me to think about, because both of them are in the bottom half of the league as far as records are concerned. So you don't really think they are trying to pivot for draft position by going into it didn't look like anybody really wanted to win that game, but they definitely gave the fans that went there at least a nice show. And Saquon gave all his fantasy owners a beautiful, beautiful chef's kiss of a performance where he had 279 yards from scrimmage. That's a Giants franchise record. That boy Saquon is special. He's a special player. The way he had I think it was like a 40 or 50 yard catch in the end zone that you just don't see that from many running backs. There's only like maybe a handful that you can even think about that can go out there and just catch out the backfield route running and just have that athlete ability to make some plays like that. So shout out to Saquon for having an amazing last game of the fantasy season, as his last game will be week 17 against the Eagles. So next player on the biggest fantasy performance list was Mark Andrews, who has become a bit of the breadwinner in the Lamar Jackson passing game, or the Ravens passing game to be more correct. Mark Andrews is a big-time target for Lamar, and that helps not only the Ravens, but getting up points and being able to produce and be efficient, but it helps Lamar when things start to break down and he doesn't know where to go, because when we get to the playoffs, when the NFL starts to really get into the playoffs and after their bye week, defenses really start to hone in on what you like to do. And if you're facing a good defense, like if you're facing a Patriots, if you're facing this newly tooled Chiefs defense that's really started to figure some things out, they're going to try and take away things that they know you like to do. So now Lamar Jackson is a freak athlete, so it's hard to me to imagine they can just take away his running ability out the pocket. But if they really force him to be a pocket passer, having someone like Mark Andrews who can get up there and get that football is phenomenal. And he had a wonderful game. Yeah, I think he was 31 points in fantasy and PPR, so he had a excellent game. Next on the list, Kenyon Drake. Kenyon Drake was another one. He's just, ever since he's gotten to Arizona, that man has just shined and shown a whole bunch of promise. He looks like he's the best player on that offense. And that's crazy because for years, everybody would talk about, oh yeah, Kenyon Drake is going to be great. He has all this talent. And every time somebody would pick him up and draft him, they just would be disappointed because it just wouldn't work out. One of my buddies, his name is David, he's been drafting Kenyon Drake for a few years and it just hasn't panned out. And he had to let him go because it just didn't work out. So he traded him off a while ago before he went to Arizona, and now Kenyon Drake, Arizona is showing all the promise that he had coming out of college at Alabama. So shout out to Kenyon Drake if you have him. I know if you've had him for very long and kept your faith in him, faith means a lot. So he definitely did you well on that bet. He bet on himself, and you bet on him. So congratulations to both sides in that profitable agreement. Now for a little bit of the negative side of the coin. So last week I was reviewing the Seattle game versus Arizona, the other game where Kenyon Drake decided to rip off and just destroy. That's what he did. He destroyed my fantasy season that week. But that was the week after he did that, and then Seattle was playing Arizona. So the Arizona defense is not statistically that good, and they haven't been all season. And especially in the secondary, they've been struggling. So I recommended that, Seattle's wide receivers should look to have a really good game. And I think that was the consensus for everybody. Everybody thought Seattle would have a good game offensively. Russell Wilson is an MVP candidate. He's been playing MVP level for the last 2-3 years. DJ Metcalf has looked to be a really good asset in their offense. And Tyler Lockett is special. So when you look at it from across the board on paper, from a common sense standpoint, you really thought this was kind of a gimme. Like this should be a good, profitable fantasy production day from Seattle, and it just didn't happen. They had the worst day you could ever imagine. And if you had someone like a Tyler Lockett in your lineup, Russell Wilson had a horrible game, and Metcalf didn't really see the ball that much either. And when you look at it, you're just like, what happened? And I don't know what to tell you. Now, of course, the big news is Marshawn is getting picked up by the Seahawks. He's coming back. Marshawn, Beastquake, Beast Mode, Mr. Skittles. He's coming back to the 12th man, and that's going to be a real interesting thing. That's coming up later on in the podcast. We're going to talk about that. But, yeah, there's a lot of injuries across the board. Their offensive line is a bit banged up. Of course, Chris Carson is looking like he's not going to be able to go, which is why Marshawn is so imperative. They've just been working out a whole bunch of their pass running backs. I believe Robert Turbin is worked out with them. I'm not sure if he's signed yet or not, but they're just looking for any help in that position. So clearly there's some things in Seattle that people need to start looking at, because a few weeks ago they were looking like a really big contender for the Super Bowl, and now it's looking like it may it may be a little bit different than that. Just because their defense has always been a little bit shaky. We have this common conception that they're still a really, really good defense, and that just isn't the case. They're above average. They're not the worst, and they're not the best. So it's still that bias from watching them all those years ago with the Legion of Boom, and that really hasn't been the case anymore. So it's really been the Russell Wilson show, and when the Russell Wilson show essentially gets turned off, it is not a pretty sight to see. All right, so coming up after this break, we're going to get into some games to watch because the fantasy season is done for the yearly fantasy players. So what do we watch now? What do we go watch? What games are interesting? How do we watch football again, like a regular person? That'll be coming up right after this break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Alright, so we're coming back into the break here after talking about the biggest fantasy performances of Week 16 and the most disappointing one. So let's go ahead and think about who to watch for the last week of the season. Now, our fantasy seasons are done. If you do the standard 13-week regular season into the playoff standard, we are finished. The game is done. But now it's time to go into what I like to call the cool down stage. We are no longer stressing anymore. The stress is over with. The weeks have been won. The money has been given up. The group chats have been on fire and now cooled off. People have been cussed out and sworn against. Email threads are going crazy. And no one wants to play anymore. So you kind of know what's happening there. So now it's time to watch football again. So what's going to make us to watch football for the rest of the season? So what games to start with? I would say the first few games are the ones that are going to decide the NFC East. So of course that is the Eagles versus the Giants and the Cowboys versus the Redskins. Now, I'm really interested in this Cowboys game just because the Redskins are a team notorious for kind of being a little bit petty, and I don't think they want the Cowboys to go into the playoffs. If they could do anything with a record that isn't going to get them anywhere besides a decent draft pick, they're going to take the Cowboys' hopes and dreams away from them. I know players like Adrian Peterson are super hyper competitive, so there's no way he's gonna shut it down during Week 17 when he has a chance to take somebody else out with him. The Redskins are actually, now they're not a good team, but they play hard. They don't just sell the game away. They definitely go out there and play some football. So it's not like this is going to be a gimme game for the Cowboys. And the Cowboys have been known this season to get the job done against teams that they're supposed to. So they beat bad teams, and they usually beat them pretty bad. And that's how we fall into this trap. Like, oh, are the Cowboys good? Are they world beaters? Can they get it done this season? And we saw that earlier in the season, a little bit in the middle of the season. And now we kind of get their MO at the moment in time. So I don't really know what to expect from them because we still are unsure about Dak's real health situation, if he's good to go as far as being what he was a few weeks ago? Or is he still lingering on with the injury? Amari Cooper doesn't seem to be 100%, but that's no excuse. Nobody's 100%. So you just have to get out there and play hard and get it done. So that's a good game to watch. See if the Cowboys can handle their business and beat the Redskins. And on the other side of the NFC East, of course, it's the Eagles versus the Giants. Now, the thing about this game is that Eagles win, they're in the playoffs. And the thing about that is the Eagles are so decimated across all different types of positions, from wide receivers to cornerbacks to tight end. They're just hurt. They're a really, really hurt team. Now, I know I just said that injuries don't matter, next man up. Everybody's hurt. But this is a little bit special because they are really hurt. So what does that mean for Carson Wentz and that offense? They've been really, really dependent on people coming out the backfield. Their running backs have been wide receivers, so to speak, and their wide receivers that they do have been just bottom of the roster people who are now starting to emerge. And it's really kind of an interesting story because now you're seeing people, they might have a chance in this NFL for now. Because you could argue that people like Boston Scott weren't going to stay in this league for too long just because they weren't going to get the play time. But now, since there's so many injuries and, you got to take life when they give you advantages, you got to take that by the horns and be able to show out and play. And people like Boston Scott have been doing that. And then, of course, Sanders has been a huge asset for Philadelphia, especially in that Cowboys game where he looks so dynamic. And he's going to be a really good player for the time being. And that's just it. Who is going to step up? Dallas Goedert is a name that a lot of people have been talking about because Zach Ertz has a broken rib, and we don't really know exactly how that's going to work out. Excuse me, he has a fractured rib. It's not fully broken. But we're going to have to see where that lands him because he might be a really big target for Carson Wentz to get the ball down the field. And their defense, you saw Fletcher Cox. He came in now in the lineup last week. He came back and toughed it out. But we don't know how healthy he is. And we had some cornerbacks get carted off. So they're just hurt all the way, but they keep fighting. And they're a really, really scrappy team. And they're going up against a Giants team where coming off of a game where Saquon and Daniel Jones had the games of their lives, essentially, as far as the offensive efficiency standpoint came off. Daniel Jones had a really, really big game. I think he had like 37 fantasy points or something ridiculous like that. So there's no telling what you're going to get from the Giants. I don't think they're a team also that is just going to sit there and lose just to lose because it's the last week of the season. I feel like a lot of teams who are already destined to be some of the worst teams in the league record-wise, they take that last game a lot with pride, saying that, hey, we're still professionals and we still want to win. And it's very rare that you see a team just kind of give up near the end. So I'd be very much interested in looking into those two games. Then, of course, you have the Titans versus the Texans, which are a really good matchup because me personally, I think the Titans are the better team and the Texans have the better record, but the Texans haven't been playing that well in recent weeks. And specifically, Deshaun Watson, he has been a little bit shaky and up and down. And I think that's because of when Will Fuller is out of that offense, of course, they do not look the same. And they start to focus more on Hopkins. They double him a lot. So the Texans have been trying to establish the run a bit with Carlos Hyde. And that has had some positive and a little bit of negative effects here or there. And that defense, they're getting a nice shot in the arm at some point, I believe, in these playoffs because J.J. Watt is back in practice. I don't know if that means he'll be playing on Sunday. But they are looking like a team that is not really ready for the playoffs. They don't seem like they are hitting that stride that good teams do. You can tell when a team is going to be good in the playoffs by when they hit their peak near the end of the season. Now, I think Texans they peaked closer to week 10. That's when they looked like they were their best, their strongest, and they've just kind of been teetering off. While the Titans have consistently looked good, even though they've lost a few straight, they've consistently looked like a good quality AFC football team. So I would not be surprised if the Titans go and give them a run for their money and take this victory, especially since they need this game way more than the Texans do, because the Texans are already secured to have their spot in the playoffs anyway. So it wouldn't be surprising if the Texans decide to rest some players potentially. And looking at the last game real quickly that might be interesting is the 49ers versus Seahawks, because that has a lot to do with playoff seedings. It could get the Saints in. It could boost a lot of players up, or a lot of teams into bye weeks. And also, of course, because Marshawn is coming back. So everybody wants to see what he has left in the tank, if he has any at all, what Seattle decides to do because Marshawn is back, what the 49ers decide to do, because, there's been a lot of talk that Marshawn's coming back. So they may take that as a edge. They might use that as a chip on their shoulder, saying that just because Marshawn's coming back doesn't mean that we're just going to allow him to run all over us. That's what Marshawn's calling card, and they've had a lot of good NFC battles in the past, in the playoffs especially. So the 49ers are well familiar with how Marshawn is and him as a player. So that's just a matchup that I'm going to be keyed into very much so during the weekend. So coming up after this break, we're going to talk about some penny pincher picks. Best value for daily fantasy. I got 3 players for you coming right up.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, welcome back. Let's get into the next segment here. So we're going to look at some penny pincher picks, best value for daily fantasy football. So your FanDuels and your DraftKings lineups are going to be filled with all different types of players. So the Saquons, the Christian McCaffreys, the Michael Thomases. We all know who are the superstar studs when it comes to this sort of stuff. But you can't spend all your money, salary caps and all that. So it's time to look at who can help you save some here so you can invest in a better player down the road. So first player on the list, I'm going to talk about Mr. Robert Griffin III. Now, we all know the story of RG3. Top overall pick, came in the draft, same as Andrew Luck. And he had a really, really great rookie season. And things started to teeter off as he got injured, and his career, he's bounced around a bit, but his presence in the NFL is still very much big as far as fans and knowing where he came from, coming out of Baylor, and it was just an interesting story, and people still love him. And he has been the backup for Lamar Jackson this season in Baltimore, and he's going to get the nod for this game. And I am interested to see what he is able to do. Only because I think the Ravens are still a really, really good team. And they're going to be playing a not so good team coming up. So what can we expect from him? I'm not too sure exactly. So you never really know what you're going to get. The Ravens are a really run-heavy football team. So he's no Lamar Jackson either. So what can you really expect out of a guy who is not as athletic as Lamar Jackson? So he's not going to be doing designed runs, isn't going to be escaping out the pocket and running for 30 yards every play. But what can he do against a defense in the Steelers who are really, really good, right? So this is where I think having someone like Mark Andrews and other players like that really help, because RG3 is a really smart backup and he plays within himself. I don't think he's going to do anything that's going to jeopardize the team or him or even his physical body. I just think that you might be surprised at what he's able to do. I think he might be efficient. He might move the ball down the field. And at the end of the day, that Ravens defense is going to give them more offensive chances just because, let's be honest here, the Steelers offense is not that good just because their quarterbacks have not played well. And they've been in and out of the lineups. It's like 1 week is Hodges, 1 week is Rudolph, 1 week is Hodges, and 1 week it is Rudolph. And this week it is Hodges because Rudolph is on IR with a shoulder injury. So I would just be mindful. If you need a quarterback, but you don't want to overpay and you want to spend on guys that you know can secure a win for this weekend, I would look into RG3 because at the end of the day, you want somebody who you can depend on. Now, he may not be somebody you can depend on, but you know his floor. So I'm always interested in floor guys, floors and ceilings. Whose floor is high enough to where you feel like you can trust him and pick him up at a low cost and realize what you're going to get. Don't expect too much, and you just move those dollars somewhere else. So Robert Griffin III is somebody who I would be looking at myself. Next on the list is Dallas Goedert. You know, we just talked about him earlier last segment for the Eagles as Zach Ertz is dealing with a fractured rib. So you never really know what's going to happen with that. And he had a really big game last week against the Dallas Cowboys where you can only assume that he's going to be involved in their passing game because they literally have no one else really to pass to in the passing game. So Dallas Goedert is definitely going to be a pickup that a lot of people are going to be making. A lot of people who are into this fantasy stuff have already hip onto the idea that Dallas Goedert might get some play. So what do we really need to expect from him as a floor? So I don't expect to see a super big production day like something crazy like what Saquon did or the 31-pointer that man Mark Andrews came around and got for the Ravens. But I do expect to see some good catches out of some different formations and you know what they do over there in Philadelphia as far as creativity with Doug Peterson. So I'm expecting to see some plays ran for him and he'll see the ball. I see at least 8 touches coming his way. I don't know if he'll get them all and if the offensive line can hold up in order for them to really get the ball down the field in the first place. That's something that you have to check out as well. But let's be mindful here that the Giants' defense is not that good. They're really not that good. So you never really know what you can get out of a game like this. He might have a really big game. So his floor seems to be somewhere between that Dallas game and weeks prior where he was effective. But his ceiling might be really high just because of the opponent he's going against. And no matter how much pride you have, if you're not that good as a defensive unit, you're still not that good. One last guy we're going to talk about is Adrian Peterson. Plays for the Redskins. Future Hall of Famer. One of the best running backs, if not the best running back of the decade, in my opinion. He still plays hard, still runs hard every play, and he still produces at a good fantasy level, surprisingly. So if you've had him as your running back too, because you're going a deep league, like in a 14-man or something like that, he's produced pretty well for you. And in the last 4 games, he has gotten a touchdown in all of those games. So it's safe to say that he has still been producing. And it's hard for me to see that the Redskins, sit him down or tell him to cool it off. You know, he doesn't have that many games left in him, so he's going to make every single one of them count. And I think that he is a guy that loves competition. He loves being petty. If he can't get in the playoffs, I know for sure he's going to make sure that the guys that they're playing, if he has a chance, to not let them get over there into the playoffs. So I will look into the Adrian Peterson pickup very much so because he just is a gamer. He likes to play the game of football, and he's somebody that, honestly, he just relishes in situations where he has nothing to lose. What does Adrian Peterson have to lose here? Besides what everybody else does when they play the game of football, which is, injuries and money and all that stuff. But everybody has that. So he has no playoff implications to lose. He has no dollars as far as guarantees and all that stuff. So he might as well go out there and finish strong on the season and also take out one of their division rivals out the playoffs along with it. Now, I'm sure that would be a great way for Redskins fans to end the new year, is to take the Cowboys out with them and remind them where they should be, which is not in the situation that they're currently in. And it would just be, for NFC rivalries standpoints, this would be the icing on the cake, the chef's kiss. Our season may have not gone as well as we'd like it to, but at least we got the Cowboys out of there. And I guess the Giants would think the same way for the Philadelphia Eagles as well. Our season didn't go what we planned it to go, but hey, we got a win at the end of the day. We got some looks for Saquon, and we know what we're building for the future. So those are my 3 penny pincher picks. Best value for daily fantasy. So Dallas Goedert, Robert Griffin III, and Adrian Peterson. And if you want to really be a gambler, I guess you can pick Marshawn. You never know what you're going to get. We don't really know exactly who he is right now, and that's what we're actually going to get into after this break. We're going to talk some Marshawn Lynch Seattle news. So, as obviously he got signed, so we're going to see just where he is. What can he do? What's the chances of Seattle coming out and winning this game? That's going to be coming up right after this break.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back. So last time we talked about some penny pincher picks, and now we're going to get into some Marshawn stuff. So Marshawn Lynch signed with Seattle over the weekend, so he's back. He's back in the league. His last stint was with the Raiders, where he did take on an injury that definitely sidelined him for the rest of the season. It seemed to be the rest of his career, but now he seems to be back. His second stint out of essential retirement all over again, and now he's back with the team where it all got started. So where does that leave us? Well, I'm really not sure. Personally, I'm not sure what we are expecting out of somebody who's been out of the league. Of course, he passed his physical, but it doesn't mean that he is 100% in football shape, like high-intensity playoff scenario football shape. So I don't really know where that takes him. And to be honest, I'm not sure if Seattle knows where that's going to take them. Of course, they needed running backs. They needed somebody to help fill out the void that Chris Carson has left, and they don't have a lot of options. So they've been looking at people to sign. So they signed Marshawn, and I hope the best for him. I'm a big fan of him, even though He took my team out of the playoffs one good time. It's a famous run. I don't really know what it's called anymore. It's one of those big time runs. I don't know. Something about a quake. Regardless, he was a really good player, and it's a really nice story. Something that the NFL, ESPN, all the major networks have been surfacing and recycling and passing along as the week has gone by. But the biggest thing is, what do we know about Seattle's offense already? Looking back at some stats, their offense is very much predicated on the run game. That's what gets them going. That's what is able to get people like Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett and DJ Metcalf going. So looking at a few games, in the last 5 games, they've won 3 of them, right? So in all of those wins, they've had at least 150 yards rushing across the board. And in those games, they've had really good passing stats. And it looks like if they don't run the football well, it does come to a screeching halt. And without Chris Carson being there, someone has to fill that void. So Marshawn seems to be the candidate of choice, and it's really just, what can he do? We don't really know. We haven't watched him in a few months. When he was with the Raiders, he seemed to have, he still had some juice in him. And that's always a good sign, is that somebody still is able to have some juice. And that injury kind of derailed that whole scenario, because the year before, when he played with the Raiders, he or the year prior before that injury year, he was close to 1,000 yards. He had about like 870 something yards the year prior, and then he was on pace to do just about the same, and that injury did end up occurring that sidelined him. So that's really the biggest question. Are we sure he can produce? I want to say they're going to give him every opportunity to do this. And Marshawn is a guy that he's been very much a humble man as far as what he does in the NFL. He does a lot of community work. He always just seems to make the most out of every opportunity because of where he came from and how he was brought up, is that, not every chance you should take lightly, and you never know when it's going to be all said and done and over, and that's it. So I'm sure he's going to take this opportunity the best he can, and he's just going to be running as hard as he possibly and physically can, because that's what he is known for. He never was known for the fastest guy, not the most shifty guy, but his legs are his moneymaker, his breadwinner, what he's known for. It keeps him turning. It's like a turbine, which is kind of funny because they looked at Robert Turbin coming back as well. But he just keeps him going. His legs don't stop no matter what. And, that's going to be something also interesting to look at. If he can still keep those legs moving and keep moving the pile and not going down, it's going to be interesting to see how the refs officiate the game. Because, some refs have been known for blowing the whistle a bit too early or not blowing it at all during some runs where people should have been stopped. So it just depends on that officiating team of who's going to be officiating Marshawn, because he is very much known for not being down until that knee hits the ground. So he's going to take full advantage of whatever situation that is to occur in. So let's look at Seattle again as far as their offensive scheme game plan. So because there's no way they can have another really bad game as they did last week in the passing game. So what can Marshawn help them do in play action and getting some players open and making people commit against a 49ers defense that at the beginning of the year was super stout, the best that we've seen in the NFL this year besides the Patriots. And after some injuries on that D-line and stuff, it has definitely come back down to earth a bit. It's still really good, but they just are not the same team from like 7 weeks ago, and that's just across the board in the NFL. Nobody who starts off hot typically ends off hot at the same way, especially on defense, because either you play your defense into shape or injuries just occur. It's a part of the league. So that's why depth is so important, and getting people reps throughout the season so that way they're not coming in blind and not knowing just where they stand and what they're going to do. So against the 49ers defense that has been giving up some points. So this is a good opportunity for Seattle. I feel like they understand the moment. Marshawn is not somebody who hasn't been in the moment, so he understands the gravity of the situation. This is a big game with a lot of big implications as far as seeding and stuff. And if he wants to make a deeper run with this team and make this as magical as possible, of course, he's going to do everything in his power to make this game close, gritty. It's going to be a gritty game. You know, the NFC West is so interesting. They just make everything is hard. Everything is rough. They're not some team that they're not just a division that understands hard-nosed football. They live it. They preach by it. They just know each other very well. And it's going to be a ugly rivalry game, and I'm excited to watch it. I'm sure that there'll be some dynamic plays. I'm interested to see what is going to happen as far as the passing situation for the 49ers, because that defense across the way in Seattle has not been the best all year. Now, their offense has been kind of carrying a bit. They've been giving up a lot of points. And in some games, in some weeks, they just have not been able to really stop anybody. And that's been a concern all season long. So now with this whole Chris Carson out for the season situation is really it's really interesting, because now we're going to have to look and see if their defense can really get some stops now. And of course, we know they still have some big time players like Bobby Wagner, for instance, but that's just not enough. You need a full team effort, people flying at the ball. But people have been able to pass up and down on this team for a little while now. And honestly, it's just been kind of staggering to see, because you're so used to the idea that, they are the Legion of Boom still. And that's just not the case. They haven't been for a while, of course. So when you look at their passing stats in the last 5 games, they have been giving up 400, 400, 400, mid 300s for the last 4 games as far as the passing stats, and then they've been letting people rush all over them. So there's been a lot of weird things going on in those games where they're giving up 600 something yards of total offense to teams, and these are not like the best teams in the world. They're not game beaters. Even in that win against Philadelphia, they gave up almost 600 yards of offense. In Minnesota, they definitely gave up 600 yards worth of offense in a loss. In a win. So it's not like there's an improvement to be made. Even though they're winning, their defense has not played the best. So we're going to have to see a little bit more coming out of them. So we're going to take another quick break, and we're going to go into who is going to be dominant for the next decade of fantasy football. And I have a couple big names that I'm interested in seeing, and I have my money put on. So we're going to talk about that coming up after this break.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football, from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
All right, so coming back into this after the break, I said that we're going to go into who is going to dominate the next decade of fantasy football. As you know, we're getting to the end of 2019. We're going to be starting a new decade. that's a big thing. It's big in media. Everybody's doing their decade stuff. Who is the best things at this or most memorable stuff? But I want to see what's going to be in the future. Who I feel like is going to be the future of the NFL when it comes to fantasy points and big time performances, and guys who are going to be breaking some records and stuff like that. So at the very first thing I thought about is the Panthers and how they're moving. They're looking to be moving in a direction of a teardown, a rebuild. And I think the only player that's kind of safe on that rebuild is Christian McCaffrey. And that's just because he might be on any given Sunday, he might be the best back in football. And honestly, on any given Sunday, it flip-flops that he might be the best player in the NFL. His production and usage rate is kind of scary how they use him. He just touches the ball all the time. I've never seen a guy that just kind of dictates the offense by himself in like a running back position like this. I think this is where the league is headed to as far as running back usage. If there was like a comparison, this would be like when Russell Westbrook was 1 year removed from the Kevin Durant off-season signing to the Warriors, and he just went on a huge triple-double tear. And this is what I feel like when I watch Christian McCaffrey, is just that this guy is off the leash. He's unloaded, and he is just running. He's running hard. He's catching ball at the backfield. He's making people really, really try and stop him, and it's still not stopping him. He's still getting his touches, still getting his yards, still getting in the end zone, and it's just making you think like, wow, this guy coming out of college, we knew he was going to be really nice, but I don't think anybody really thought this was the level of Christian McCaffrey that we're going to see. And it's kind of crazy because you see people of his player type skill set, like a Kamara, like a Saquon, and these are the type of people coming out of college that teams are starting to look at now. It's no longer a league of this guy is just a bulldozer running down. Like the Adrian Peterson prototypes are no longer usable in the league, in the sense of they're usable. Let me not say that. They are not what is sought after because it makes your team one-dimensional. So, for example, there are times like when the Saints had Adrian Peterson, that offense was very stagnant because as soon as Adrian Peterson came in the game, they knew what was going to happen. The defense knew what they were going to do. It was going to run the ball, probably up the middle, run it to the outside. They knew it was running the ball because Adrian Peterson is notorious for not being able to catch out the backfield very well, and also he wasn't the best pass blocker. So you knew what the motive was when he came in the game. So on the flip side, when you see people who can catch out the backfield, who can make nice blocks and big time blocks in the passing game, their value just skyrockets as far as usability in offense and making offenses more versatile all across the board. And when you can get a group of them, that's when you start seeing those running back by committees, because if your skill set is versatile, your team will be versatile. And that's something that is always going to be a big time thing. Like, I have a feeling like if Chris Johnson was reborn and put into this era, he would be amazing. Like, he was amazing back then just because of his raw speed and just natural talent. But just imagine putting him in a system like a McVay or a Shanahan or a Payton. Even Bill Belichick likes to pass out the backfield with James White. If you could put him in that James White role, oh man, he would be just ridiculous. So Christian McCaffrey is definitely somebody who, in the next 10 years or so, he's going to be around for a long time, and he's going to do some great things. Next, I am looking at is Pat Mahomes. Now, some people are saying that Lamar Jackson's the future of the NFL, and I'm not going to sit there and take that away from them. I think Lamar Jackson's really good, and he's a special player. But I feel like people have forgotten just how good Pat Mahomes is, and he's actually starting to remind people that, he won the MVP last year, and his team started off the year pretty hurt. He was hurt himself. And now he's on this comeback of reminding people across the NFL that he's still this guy who in his second year was torching the NFL. He was the darling. Now it's moved over to Lamar. And I actually like this. It looks like Pat Mahomes has an edge to himself now. It's like that whole thing of being able to put a chip on yourself when you know you're still at the top of your game. And sometimes it's hard to find what drives you. And what's driving him right now is the fact that nobody is really looking at the Chiefs like they were in the preseason rankings, in the first few weeks rankings, when they were projected to be maybe the best team in football. And now their defense is playing way better. And now Pat Mahomes is looking like MVP Pat Mahomes again. He's slinging that football across the field. And he is the perfect quarterback for today's era. His pocket mobility is amazing. The way he can throw the football in 3 different ways. He can throw off his other hand and get fancy when, even though you don't want him to do that all the time, he still has the capability of making plays. And that's what you need out of a quarterback these days. If you want to go far and he's your franchise, you want him to be able to make plays. You need playmakers. That's why quarterbacks like we saw on Monday night, not named Aaron Rodgers, were not really effective in games like that because Kirk Cousins couldn't make plays like that. But Pat Mahomes is the future. He is going to rip into this league and really change the game. He is going to be a game changer for sure. He is going to be the Luka Doncic of the NFL. That's going to be my take for that. And last on the list is got to be Michael Thomas. There's been a lot of great receivers in this past decade that's come into the league. The Julios, the Odells, Antonio Browns, Larry Fitz, all those type of receivers have been really good. Calvin Johnson, of course, a legend. Michael Thomas, in his first 4 or 5 years of the league, his production rate is astronomical. It's actually insane, and it shouldn't be happening. His catch radius is the size of a bus. He doesn't drop many balls at all. And he's just always open. Even when he's not open, he's open. Just throw it to him. Because the way he's able to shield his body to secure the ball, the way he can, his route running that people don't even talk about as much as they should. People always say he's not that fast, he's not that quick, or he's not, he doesn't have breakout speed. They don't know he can take the top off the defense, which, that's a fair criticism. He's not that fast to take the top off the defense, but what he does so well is just his route running ability and his able to bring his catch radius and his strong hands, the way he practices and his fluidity of the game of football. He's just so good. And that's why he's racking up all these catches and all these yards. And he's not even that big of a touchdown machine over the years, but he's really starting to get it on now. And it looks like he's come into his own and he's figured it out. And when you have guys that figure out how to, the game of football at the wide receiver position, the world is their oyster at this point. Because at first, a lot of people are like, oh, Drew Brees. There's been this thing about Drew Brees making wide receivers look better than what they are for a little bit. As, we saw people like Brandon Cooks and, what's his name out of Miami? Kenny Stills, who's now with the Baltimore Ravens. When they left New Orleans, they struggled a bit in certain situations, and they weren't, you kind of just knew what they were after the fact, and they weren't as dynamic as they once were. But Michael Thomas proved this season that it won't matter who's throwing him the football. Because when Teddy Bridgewater came in, the numbers continued. When Drew Brees came back, the numbers continued. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. He's going to be amazing. All right, so those are my 3 players to watch for the next decade. And after that, we're going to go into another break. And coming in out of the break, we're going to talk about my fantasy New Year's resolutions for next season. Coming up.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
All right, so the last segment of the day, we're gonna come back and do a little bit of introspection, looking at myself, what I need to do to get myself right for the next upcoming fantasy football season. So the best way to do that, of course, is to be a little festive and talk about some New Year's resolutions for my fantasy season coming up next year. So for 2020, what do I want to change about my fantasy football habits? I think number one, this is the number one thing I have to do in order to be just better all around as far as fantasy is concerned, and it's to let go. When I'm going out throughout my day on fantasy football Sundays, I'm never having a good time anymore. I don't know what's happened in the past few years. Maybe it's because there's more at stake for me now as far as time and effort, and I'm doing more things, and I haven't been watching football this season for the fun of it anymore. I've just been watching for fantasy and keeping up with all my players that I have. And, when you have so many different leagues, it's hard to keep up sometimes, and you're just trying to see who's going to have an explosion, who's going to do this, who's going to do that. It starts to suck the fun out of stuff, and you'll be out during your day. You can't even watch games, and you're just trying to keep up with scores, and you're constantly refreshing your phone to check these fantasy leagues, and you're on 3 or 4 different apps, and you're just like, why is this guy doing this well? Or you'll be 15 minutes into a game, and you're wondering why a running back has 0 points. Like, did he get hurt, or like, what's happening? You're checking halftime stats, and you're wondering what's going on. You're refreshing Twitter because you need to know if somebody is just selling, or is, that phrase "just selling" is something that you got to stop saying, because these are people, and it's game plans and scheming and stuff. So you got to take a deep breath and remember that it's just a game, and that's something I think I like to share with everybody. Remember that it's just a game. I think I say this at least every week. It's just a game. So that's something that I definitely need to continue to work on, because you got to enjoy life, because life is short and you never know, not every day is guaranteed. So fantasy will always be there for you at a different time. I'm going to try and check fantasy a little bit less and not be a fantasy nerd and an addict when it comes to this stuff, because that's what really has turned into. Is just that I'm always checking it. So next thing that I'm going to try and accomplish is not to be in so many leagues. I was in 4 leagues this year, and it was tough to keep up. And not only just to keep up, the emotional turmoil of being in 4 leagues this year has driven me to a new place, a new place of being. I didn't know that I could just be so vividly upset because of a game like fantasy football. And before, I used to play like maybe 2 leagues at the most. And now that I was in 4, I did 1 for free, and then I was in 4 paid ones, and it just was, the stress levels were crazy. The trash talk was crazy. You couldn't keep up with moves because we would be doing the same moves, and then all of a sudden you're missing a large discussion in one league that you weren't paying attention to because you're worried about something else. Trade, waiver wire stuff. People are more active in one league than they are the other, so you're trying to make sure that you can pick up some guys. And it can just get really hectic, man. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on in your everyday life, and having 4 leagues can just be insane. And don't even get me started if you're a manager of it, like you're commissioner of a league. That's just out of control. I used to commission for years. I was a commissioner for one league for at least 5 or going 6 years, and I recently just didn't do it just because I was tired of that and I just wanted to play the game. And just playing the game, it was even as stressful. So I don't really know what I need to do. Maybe I should just stop. Maybe I should just play just daily fantasy. Maybe the league fantasies formats are just getting a little bit out of hand for me. But I know I probably can't stick to that one. So just try to limit myself on the leagues, just because you don't need to be involved in so many, because that's just a lot of investment. And you think it's just a monetary investment, you're putting X amount here, there, and you're shoveling out money and betting and all that stuff. And then when you really think about it, right, you're not even money. It's just the time at that point. You're playing just because you invested so much time and effort into these fantasy leagues, and you just really need that to pay off. That's what you're playing for. Is for that emotional investment to pay off sometimes. At the end of the day, you already knew that money was lost if you're playing fantasy. Because every other week you think that this is the end. This is the end of your season. Your players aren't playing well. Nothing ever goes 100% right all the time in fantasy. And you're always just playing the numbers game, and you're just going week to week. And it's just a war of attrition. And a war of who starts hot in the beginning of the season may end up cold at the end, and vice versa. So you're just playing the hot-cold game. So it's really just you're playing on an emotional high every Sunday, every Thursday, Monday night. You're just on edge. So I don't need to be on edge for 4 leagues 3 days out of the week. I don't think I need to do that anymore. I think one last one is I have to get more active in waivers. I used to be really, really good at waiver wire pickups in previous leagues and a few years ago. But working the waiver wire is still very important, even though I've been more of a draft-heavy guy. I've been going into drafts trying to stack players, right? So what I did in the past few seasons, which have put me in the playoffs, so I can't say they haven't worked. I just haven't gone to the apex mountain yet, to the championship in the last few seasons. But I would pick a position, and depending on where I'm at in the draft, I would get the guy who I know would be my sort of bell cow. So like this season, I went with Alvin Kamara, and then I just start stacking up on running backs. Now, this season I started out with Alvin Kamara, some Marlon Mack, who I was really high on. I was really hoping to see something out of Kerryon Johnson. So I was really, really, really interested in seeing how that was going to work out for me. And honestly, it kind of backburned as soon as Kerryon went out with the injury. My season kind of tailed off. There was a lot of injuries going on. But I fought on and continuing, and Alvin Kamara wasn't the best fantasy player this season. And I had a chance to get Christian McCaffrey. So you never really know where it's going to work out. But that's why waiver wires are so important, because there's always a chance to right the ship. And honestly, being involved in so many leagues and just trying to do my best in some of them and not all, because some were kind of lost seasons, maybe I should just shift my focus to a few, so that way I can always give my 100% all into trying to make some deals, looking who might be able to help my team in the long run. And that's just what I probably need to do. So just a recap of my fantasy football and New Year's resolutions. 1, don't let fantasy football ruin my life or ruin my days when I'm out and about and always thinking about it too much. Give it some breaks. Number 2 would be to not be so locked into so many leagues and playing daily fantasy at the same time. Focus on 1 or 2, play daily fantasy here or there. That seems to be the sweet spot for someone like me. And finally, work the waiver wire again. Waiver wire is important in keeping that available at all times in your life. In fantasy, it's super, super valuable. And never forget the waiver wire. All right, so that's all I have for today. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, once again hosted by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to thank you for listening. Please leave a like, rate, respond, comment underneath what we can do to improve. And please share us, give us 5 stars. And thank you. Don't forget to follow us on social media, so our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And have a great holiday, great week, great day, and keep on playing fantasy football.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.